Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. So happy to welcome Jennifer Highfield, who is the president and CEO of the National First Ladies Library. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning.
Well, and you're rather new in town, right, Jenny? Where are you from?
I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, but my husband and I live with our family in Akron, Ohio.
Mm-hmm. What drew you to working at the First Ladies Library?
Well, my background is predominantly working with cultural institutions across the United States. My husband and I moved back here. I worked for several and then moved to work for social service agencies and Catholic organizations. But I really missed working for a cultural institution and lending my degrees and all of my education to that. And so this opportunity came up. I interviewed, and to be completely candid, never thought in a million years. I really didn't. But all my dreams came true. And as I said when I interviewed, it brings together everything: my love of history, my respect for historic sites, and then working for a museum. So I get the best of all worlds.
Had you visited it before interviewing for the job?
I had a long, long time ago when my husband and I first moved back to the state. I came to visit the site when I came down to wait for my husband to actually get done with work one night. I was visiting, and so I had some recollections of it, mostly the house.
It's quite something, isn't it?
Oh, lovely.
Was there any surprise for you to find out just what was here in Canton, Ohio, and what Mary Regula had begun?
You know, my husband and I have worked a lot in Canton over the years, and I have such great admiration for this community. It's a quiet community. When people think of Northeast Ohio, of course, they think Cleveland and they hear of Akron. And I have such great admiration for what is happening here in Canton, Ohio, especially in the arts and culture, but in so many other areas. And so it wasn't a surprise to me for the fact that when I come down to First Friday or I go to a beautiful exhibit at the museum or I hear the symphony orchestra, I knew of the cultural gems that existed here. So it wasn't. I was more surprised as I started to talk about my transition to this job. And I was curious because I left a job in Cleveland to come here. How many people would say, "Where is that?" or "What are you talking about?" And I was really pleasantly surprised how many actually knew of the site and had been there. So that was actually a bigger surprise for me.
That's good. That's good to know.
Yes.
For it's more than let's first of all divide it. There's two actual buildings. There's the First Ladies Library.
Correct.
And what's the other building?
So I'll step back even further. So we operate on two city blocks in downtown Canton, which is an interesting thing for a historic site to operate in such a manner.
You have two addresses.
We have two addresses. And so what our functionality is, there's a historic bank building that has been restored to be a museum space and the library space, as well as some office space. And then there's the home of Ida Saxton McKinley. Between that is our parking lot, and more importantly, what most don't know is the park that we actually own and operate as well. We co-manage that with the National Park Service, all of those parts and pieces with the National Park Service.
That comes as a surprise to a lot of people, I think. That you are part of the National Park Service.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Is that typical for a museum?
No. But it's not atypical either. The National Park Service operates over 400 sites around the United States. Obviously, most people know them for their parks and for parks and recreational purposes, but they do have historic sites. The National First Ladies is interesting because we're not only a historic site. So the house is a historic site, but the bank building is a museum and a library, which doesn't necessarily always fit under the National Park Service guidelines of what they have. It might fit better under the National Archives guidelines for what they look to establish. So we sort of fit somewhere in the middle of that. I think the reason why we are with the National Park Service goes back to the beginnings of our relationship with Mary and Ralph Regula.
Sure.
And clearly, Mr. Regula's work with the National Park Service is unparalleled. Many know of the work that he's done in Northeast Ohio to ensure that land preservation was priority and the work that's been done in education and so forth and that. And so I think his background and his relationship with the National Park Service ensured that the site and the space was a part of the National Park Service.
So I'm guessing part of your job then is working on that relationship. Help me understand, what is that relationship and what you do there?
Yeah, so this is where it does get interesting. So when we became part of the National Park Service, there are different relationships that can be had with the National Park Service. A Park Service site could be solely operated by the National Park Service. A Park Service site could be operated by the National Park Service, and then there could be a friends group who could help with philanthropy and community outreach and advocacy and so forth. And very rarely, a Park Service site could be operated by through what they call a cooperative agreement. It could be operated by a nonprofit. So I work for the National First Ladies Library. That is the nonprofit operating organization at the National Park Service site, which is First Ladies National Historic Site. So if you can say all of that 3 times,
that makes
you're doing good.
Quite a business card.
It does. It does. And so, And that is really truly because that's the way Mary Regula wanted that operation and set that up through the Park Service. And it operated as such, well over 15 years in that manner. When Mary Regula stepped down several years ago, the Park Service said, look, there's new methods of operations. We really would like to see the site become truly a national landmark and to see significant change at the site. And because of that, we want to invest ourselves in the site more and be present more on site, having park rangers visible, and that national brand of the National Park Service recognized not only in this community, but regionally and nationally as well. And we should want that as well. And so my job has been, in the 6 months that I've been there, in solidifying that relationship and redefining what that looks like. So it's been a challenge. We have staff members who, for the library, who have been there since the beginning with Mary Regula, who are still there. They were dedicated and have, dedicated their careers to that site. So now there will be a commingling of those staff members with National Park Service site.
Tell me what's held in the bank building versus what we would find in the Saxton House.
Okay. So the Education and Research Center, the bank building, hosts on the first floor a changeable exhibit space. So when guests will enter into that space, you will see cases that will display a myriad of First Lady artifacts and stories, talking about every First Lady from Martha Washington to today.
Wow.
Whatever it is that the theme is of that time and what we're on exhibit. Also in that building, we operate actually down in the lower level a Nickelodeon theater, which most people don't know it's a very charming 1920s theater, completely and beautifully restored. We host lectures there, puppet shows quite frequently, and different movie screenings and so forth and so on. On the second floor of the building is actually where the library is. So and which was really the impetus for the start of the National First Ladies Library. It wasn't, Mary Regula was not intended to own buildings and be a museum. She really was about a repository for information. So that all exists on the second floor. So we do have books and manuscripts, photographs, etc., that people can come there to utilize for research, and that can be everyone from a child to a senior to scholars and so forth and so on. And we do have quite a number of visitors that come there for that reason.
Neat.
And more importantly, our guests can go free to our website. Our website's quite extensive, and so they will also spend time. They can do that outside of coming to our site, but they will spend time sometimes on our website as well, doing that research while they're there. The Saxton House is a little different. So the Saxton House was the birth home for Ida Saxton McKinley. And she lived there. Her family lived there for generations. It's a lovely, lovely home on Market and 4th Street. It's gone through significant renovations over the last 20 years to restore it, because in the early 1900s, it left the family and went to what we call commercial use. So if you would see photographs of the house in, say, 1940, you wouldn't recognize it.
Really?
Well, because what the community did is they built a faux facade on 3 sides of the house, and the only part of the house you could see 70s, you could see the third floor ballroom just peeking over this faux facade, just sort of like peeking over the grande dame of her. And then they operated a bar there. They operated restaurants there. There was a boarding house. Rumors, which I believe are fairly certain to be true, there was a brothel at one time that existed in the home. And so it operated quite differently business than presidential business over those time period. Well, then in the 70s, it just became a place of disrepair. The last boarder left the house, and it was done. She was done. And so a wrecking ball sat outside, ready to destroy her and make way for other buildings or just parking space in downtown Canton, until a family member drove by and literally saw the wrecking ball sitting outside and made phone calls and inquiries and said, "This can't happen. It's the home of a first lady. We can't possibly tear this down." And that started the work of restoration.
Thank goodness, because Canton being the only city of a president that didn't save the president's home.
That's right.
We lost that one. So he actually did live with Ida in this home for a time, yes?
Yes.
So we can kind of call it McKinley's home, his second home.
Yes.
And somehow found that house within the house.
Yes.
And tore down the facade.
Yes. So he came, tore down all of the facade. He spent, a couple $1 million to repair the front of the building, to restore it to what you see now when you drive by. Then started his work to figure out a way to restore the interior and who was going to be the partnership in that. And many people stepped up. Stark Community Foundation, the Temkin Foundation, both existed actually in the building. They had offices in there and helped with that work. And then along came Mary Regula, and also existed in the building. She wanted an office space to work on her research and her website and so forth and so on. Well, as the legend goes, as I say, she decided, well, we should look to interpret a couple of these rooms and tell the story of Ida and the wonderful first lady that lived here. And so over time, she took one room after another, and slowly there was less room for the foundation to exist there because the rooms just started slowly being restored.
So she outgrew that, and that's when all the documents moved to the bank.
That's correct.
So now what do we find in the Saxton house now?
So the interesting story about the Saxton house is we don't know exactly what it looked like. There are memories that family members have shared. So we have drawings from what the room layouts looked then. And we don't have many photographs. We have 3 to 4 photographs that can document what it looked like when they lived in the space. Otherwise, the interpretation of that space was left to imagination.
Wow.
And so Mary Regula and Dr. Sheila Fisher impeccably restored that space and what they believed it would have looked like in Victorian times. And so, no, we don't know that there would have been wallpaper in this room or a carpet in that room or what might have been there. It was based, again, on the memories of what was there or what really would have happened in Victoria times. So when you walk into the house, and we tell guests this when they walk in, that this may not have been what it looked like when Ida lived there. The other thing that happened over time, too, is that as modern amenities started to play a role in what the house looked like, so staircases were added and so forth and so on. Now there's actually an elevator in the building. That changes the dynamics of the rooms and the layout and everything. And so interpretation of that changes as well. But we do have a few rooms that we have exact photographs of. And I always love to share this with guests when they walk through the door. If you look at the photograph and look at the room, you really would have no idea that their time ever hit those spaces.
Wow.
Which is fun. And in the rest of the house, there's nuances and things that are attributed to the White House and Ida's connection to the White House or other First Ladies' connection. So in the formal parlor, the rug that's on the floor was from the same loom that Dolly Madison's requested all the new rugs to be created for the White House after the burning. So there's that connection. Does that have anything to do with Canton or Ida? No, but it's got a very interesting First Lady. The wallpaper in the dining room is an exact recreation of the wallpaper that was in the White House when Ida was in the White House. And so there's all those fun things about it that we get to share. But I think most importantly, as family members started to realize the restoration of this house was happening, they started to come forward with artifacts that they had.
Oh.
And so
From the McKinleys, or
yes, and
wow.
so the treasure, and from the Saxton family, more importantly, most of them came through the Saxton side.
Yes, from Ida's side.
Mm-hmm. And so that treasure trove is so interesting and still comes forward today.
Wow.
And so, you don't know what somebody has in their garage or in a storage facility, or they didn't even know that they had this important book or this important letter until they ask, or another family member shares that. And so then they come forward and either loan or give us those items back.
Need to talk to you further. Just found a McKinley thing in my group of stuff as I was going, as we were downsizing. I've got an amazing book from then. So,
fun.
yeah. Okay, I'll have to talk to you more about that. All right. Looking at the time, we need to take a short break. Visiting with Jenny Highfield, First Ladies National help me say the whole thing.
First Ladies National Historic Site.
Thank you. And library?
And so I work for the National First Ladies Library.
Okay. The whole thing. Anyway, we'll be back with Jenny after these words. You're listening to Our Community.